"Who invited you to Christmas dinner? You're not welcome in this family," my son-in-law said, during the dinner I had paid for. I simply replied, "I'm leaving, but before that, take a look at this DNA test with your name on it." Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. "Who invited you to Christmas dinner? You're not welcome in this family." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there, frozen, my fork halfway to my mouth, staring at my son-in-law Levi across the dining table that I had paid for. The same table where we'd shared countless meals, where I'd welcomed him into our family 8 years ago when he married my daughter Gaia. The silence that followed was deafening. My daughter, my only child, sat beside her husband like a statue. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me, just stared down at her plate as if the mashed potatoes held the secrets of the universe. "Levi," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you still have a place at this table. This is my house now, my family. You're just the old man who writes the checks." My chest tightened. This wasn't the first time Levi had been disrespectful, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like a line had been crossed that we couldn't uncross. I looked around the dining room. The Christmas tree I'd helped them pick out last weekend stood in the corner, twinkling with lights I'd helped string. The decorations covering every surface were ones I'd bought for them over the years. Even the house itself. I'd co-signed the mortgage when they couldn't qualify on their own. "Dad," Gaia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, "maybe it's better if you just go home tonight. Levi's had a long day at work." A long day at work. Levi hadn't worked a steady job in 2 years. He claimed to be a freelance consultant, but as far as I could tell, his main occupation was spending my daughter's money and treating her father like garbage. I set my fork down carefully, the clink against the plate echoing in the tense silence. "You know what, Levi? You're absolutely right. I am going to leave." Relief flickered across his face, quickly replaced by smugness. He sat back in his chair like a king who'd just dismissed a troublesome peasant. "But before I go," I continued, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I think you should see this." I pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the table between us. Levi's eyes darted to it, then back to my face. For the first time all evening, he looked uncertain. "What is that?" Gaia asked, finally looking up. "It's a DNA test," I said simply, "with your husband's name on it." The color drained from Levi's face so fast, I thought he might be having a heart attack. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then, without warning, his eyes rolled back and he slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. "Levi!" Gaia screamed, jumping up and rushing to his side. "What did you do to him?" I remained seated, watching as she tried to revive her unconscious husband. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, when I'd first discovered what Levi had been hiding, I'd felt just as faint. The difference was, I'd been alone in my car outside a suburban playground, watching my son-in-law push a little boy on a swing set. A little boy who looked exactly like him. "Call 911, Gaia demanded, but Levi was already stirring, groaning as he lifted his head. "I'm fine," he mumbled, though his face was still pale as paper. His eyes found mine across the table, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Fear. "Dad, what is this about?" Gaia's voice was shaking now. She looked between her husband and me like she was watching a tennis match she didn't understand. I picked up the envelope and tucked it back into my jacket. "Ask your husband, sweetheart, when he's feeling better." Levi's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. "Clark, wait. Let me explain." "Explain what?" I asked, pulling free from his grasp. "Explain how you've been lying to my daughter for years? Explain how you've been using our family's money to support another family? Or should we start with how you told me I wasn't welcome here while you've been stealing from us?" Gaia's gasp was sharp enough to cut glass. "What other family?" Levi's mouth worked soundlessly. The man who'd been so confident and cruel just minutes ago now looked like a cornered animal. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting in tension for so long. At 59, I wasn't as young as I used to be, but I'd never felt more clear-headed than I did in that moment. "I've been paying for this house, this lifestyle for years," I said, my voice carrying the weight of all my disappointment. I've watched you disrespect me, manipulate my daughter, and treat our family like your personal bank account. But I kept quiet because Gaia loved you, and her happiness meant everything to me. I looked at my daughter, seeing my late wife's eyes staring back at me, wide with confusion and growing fear. But some things are more important than keeping the peace. Levi had managed to sit up straight, but sweat beaded on his forehead. You don't understand the situation. Oh, I understand perfectly. I pulled my car keys from my pocket. I understand that you have an 8-year-old son named Marcus, living in Riverside with his mother Jennifer. I understand that you've been supporting them with money you've taken from Gaia's accounts. And I understand that when you told me I wasn't welcome in this family, you forgot that some secrets have a way of coming to light. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the Christmas tree lights humming in the corner. Gaia sank back into her chair, her face a mask of shock. 8 years old? I nodded grimly. Born 2 months before your wedding? 3 months earlier, I'd been having lunch at a small cafe near my office when I saw him, Levi, my son-in-law, sitting at a corner table with a woman I'd never seen before. They weren't just talking. They were intimate in the way married couples are, the way he used to be with Gaia in their early days. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was a work meeting. Maybe she was a client. Levi had always been charming, perhaps too friendly for his own good. But then I saw him reach across the table and wipe something from her lips, the gesture so tender and familiar that my stomach turned. I paid my bill quickly and left, my mind racing. Should I confront him? Tell Gaia? I decided to wait, to watch, to be sure, before I destroyed my daughter's marriage with accusations that might be unfounded. The next week, I followed him. I'm not proud of it, but at 59, I'd learned that sometimes you have to do unpleasant things to protect the people you love. Levi told Gaia he was meeting potential clients in Riverside. Instead, he drove to a modest suburban neighborhood and pulled into the driveway of a small ranch house. I parked down the street and watched through my windshield as the same woman from the cafe opened the front door. She was prettier up close, younger than Gaia by at least 5 years, with long, dark hair and a warm smile that lit up when she saw Levi. But it was what happened next that made my blood run cold. A little boy came running out of the house, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and launched himself into Levi's arms. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark hair, the same strong jawline, the same laugh I'd heard echoing through my daughter's house for years. I sat there for 2 hours, watching Levi play in the backyard with this child, pushing him on a tire swing, helping him with what looked like homework at a picnic table, acting like the devoted father he'd never been willing to become with Gaia. My hands shook as I started the car and drove home. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the times Levi had told Gaia they should wait to have children, that they needed to be more financially stable first. All the while, he already had a son he was hiding from us. I hired a private investigator the next day. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie, but I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what my daughter was really married to. The report came back 2 weeks later, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Jennifer Martinez, 28 years old, worked as a nurse at Riverside General Hospital. She'd been in a relationship with Levi for 9 years, since before he'd even met Gaia. Their son, Marcus, was 8 years old. 8 years old, which meant Levi had been with Jennifer throughout his entire relationship with my daughter. The engagement, the wedding, the honeymoon, he'd been living a double life the whole time. But the investigator found something else, something that made me physically sick. Bank records showing regular transfers from Gaia's account to Jennifer's. Levi had been using my daughter's money I'd helped her save, money from the job I'd helped her get, to support his secret family. The amounts were staggering. Over the past 3 years alone, he'd transferred nearly $40,000. Money Gaia thought was going toward their future, toward the house they were planning to buy, toward the family they'd supposedly start someday. I confronted Jennifer first. I drove to her house on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew Levi would be at home with Gaia. Jennifer answered the door with Marcus beside her, and the resemblance to Levi was even more striking up close. "Are you Jennifer Martinez?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She nodded, confusion flickering across her features. "Can I help you? I'm Clark Mitchell, Levi's father-in-law." The color drained from her face just like it had from Levi's at dinner tonight. She instinctively stepped in front of Marcus, as if to shield him from me. "I think we need to talk," I said gently, "about your relationship with my daughter's husband." We sat at her kitchen table while Marcus played in his room, and Jennifer told me everything. How she'd met Levi 9 years ago at a hospital fundraiser, how he'd told her he was single, that he'd never been married, how he'd convinced her to keep their relationship quiet because he was building his consulting business and needed to maintain a professional image. She had no idea about Gaia. In Jennifer's mind, she was Levi's only partner, the mother of his child, the woman he'd promised to marry as soon as his business took off. "He said he was waiting for the right time to make it official," she told me, tears streaming down her face. "He said he wanted to be able to give us the wedding we deserved." I showed her photos from Gaia and Levi's wedding 8 years ago. I watched Jennifer's world crumble as she realized the man she loved, the father of her child, had been lying to her their entire relationship. "He takes care of us," she whispered, as if trying to convince herself. "He pays for Marcus's school, our mortgage, everything." "With my daughter's money," I said quietly. The silence that followed was heartbreaking. Jennifer covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. In that moment, I realized she was as much a victim as Gaia was. Levi had been manipulating both women, stealing from one to support the other, lying to everyone. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. I looked around her modest home, at the pictures of Marcus and Levi on the mantel, at the life she'd built, believing in a lie. "I don't know yet, but my daughter deserves the truth." Jennifer nodded slowly. "So do I. So does Marcus." That night I went home and stared at the evidence spread across my dining room table. Bank statements, photographs, the investigator's report, even a DNA test I'd managed to obtain using hair from Levi's brush during a family dinner. Everything I needed to expose him. But I also thought about Gaia, about how this would destroy her. She'd been with Levi for 8 years. He was her whole world, her future, the person she trusted most. How do you tell your child that their entire adult life has been built on a foundation of lies? I decided to wait for the right moment, the perfect opportunity when the truth would be undeniable. I didn't know it would come tonight, with Levi's cruel words and his arrogant dismissal of everything I'd done for their family. But sometimes the universe has a way of providing exactly the opening you need. After leaving the house that night, I drove straight to my apartment and sat in the dark for hours, thinking. The look on Gaia's face when I mentioned the 8-year-old boy haunted me. I'd seen her world beginning to crack, and I knew I had to be careful about how much truth she could handle at once. The next morning, Gaia called me. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying all night. "Dad, I need to know everything." I met her at a small diner across town, somewhere Levi would never think to look for us. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect makeup replaced by dark circles under her eyes. My heart broke seeing her like that. "How long have you known?" she asked before I'd even sat down. 3 months. I slid into the booth across from her, noting how she flinched when I said it. 3 months? And you didn't tell me? I needed to be sure, and I needed to understand how deep this went. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared containing some of the evidence, but not all of it. I wasn't ready to show her the bank statements yet. "Gaia, there are things about your husband that you need to know, but I want you to be prepared." She laughed bitterly. "Prepared? Dad, my husband has a secret child. How do you prepare for that?" I opened the folder and showed her a photograph the investigator had taken of Levi, Jennifer, and Marcus at a park. They looked like a perfect family, happy and carefree. Levi was pushing Marcus on a swing while Jennifer watched with a smile that reminded me painfully of how Gaia used to look at Levi. Her name is Jennifer Martinez. She's a nurse. She thinks she's in a committed relationship with Levi. Gaia stared at the photo for a long time. "She doesn't know about me? She had no idea you existed until I told her 2 weeks ago." My daughter's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, anger, and then something that surprised me: relief. "So she's not the other woman," Gaia said quietly. "We're both being lied to." I nodded. "That's exactly right." Over the next hour, I told her about Jennifer, about Marcus, about the timeline that proved Levi had been living this double life since before their wedding. But I held back the financial information. Gaia was already dealing with enough betrayal. "What do I do now?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "That's up to you, but whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm here for you. I've always been here for you." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I know, Dad, and I'm sorry about what Levi said last night. You've done everything for us, and I just sat there like a coward." "You're not a coward, you're in shock. There's a difference." We talked for another hour before she went home to confront Levi. I made her promise to call me if things got out of hand, but I also knew she needed to handle this her own way. That afternoon, I got a call from Jennifer. "He's gone," she said without preamble. "Levi came by this morning, packed a bag, and said he had to go out of town for work, but he was acting strange, nervous. Did you talk to your daughter?" "Yes." "Is he coming back?" I thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe not to you, and maybe not to her either." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Marcus keeps asking where Daddy went. What am I supposed to tell him?" That question hit me harder than anything else. An innocent child caught in the middle of his father's lies, not understanding why the man who'd promised to always be there had suddenly disappeared. "Tell him the truth as much as you can. He deserves honesty, even if his father couldn't give it to him." Over the following weeks, I watched my daughter wrestle with her decision. Levi had returned home the day after our diner meeting, full of apologies and explanations. He claimed Jennifer was an ex-girlfriend who'd trapped him, that Marcus might not even be his son, that he'd only been helping them out of guilt. Gaia wanted to believe him. I could see it in her eyes every time we talked. 8 years of love don't disappear overnight, even when that love was built on lies. But I wasn't going to let him manipulate her anymore. I spent those weeks gathering more evidence, building an ironclad case. I obtained copies of text messages between Levi and Jennifer, love letters he'd written her, photos from family trips he'd taken with them over the years. I traced every dollar he'd transferred from Gaia's accounts, documented every lie he'd told. Most importantly, I confirmed the DNA test results. Marcus was definitely Levi's son. I also did something else. I met with a lawyer to understand Gaia's options. What I learned made my blood boil. Because Levi had been using Gaia's money to support his other family, he'd essentially been stealing from her for years. The transfers weren't just morally wrong, they were potentially criminal. The lawyer explained that Gaia could pursue charges for theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. But more than that, because they lived in a community property state, Gaia was entitled to half of everything Levi owned, including any property or assets he'd purchased for Jennifer and Marcus. The house where Jennifer lived? Levi had put it in his name, using money from Gaia's inheritance from her mother. Marcus's private school tuition? Paid for with funds from their joint savings account that Gaia had been contributing to for years. My daughter had been unknowingly financing her husband's betrayal. I made copies of everything and put together 2 comprehensive files, one for Gaia, containing all the evidence she'd need for divorce proceedings, and one for Jennifer, showing her exactly how her life had been built on stolen money. But I wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. I was waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity, when Levi would be trapped with no way to lie his way out. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. Gaia called me on a Friday evening, her voice shaking with rage. "Dad, I found something. Financial records that Levi thought he'd hidden. He's been taking money from my accounts for years." "How much?" "Over $60,000, maybe more. I'm still going through everything." I felt a surge of both pride and sadness. Pride that my daughter was strong enough to start digging into the truth, and sadness that she had to discover it on her own. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I confronted him about it, and he got angry. He said it was his money, too, that married couples share everything. But Dad, this money, some of it was from Mom's life insurance. Money she left specifically for me. That was the final straw. Levi hadn't just been stealing from Gaia. He'd been stealing from my late wife's legacy, money she'd saved to secure our daughter's future. Gaia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't let Levi know what you found. Act normal, like nothing's changed. Can you do that? Why? Because I have a plan, and if you can hold on for just a little bit longer, we're going to make sure he never hurts you again. That weekend, I made my final preparations. I contacted Jennifer and explained what I'd discovered about the money. I arranged for a process server to be ready to deliver divorce papers. I even called a locksmith to change the locks on Gaia's house. But most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for what was about to happen. This wasn't just about exposing Levi's lies anymore. This was about protecting my daughter's future, making sure she could rebuild her life without the weight of his manipulation holding her down. The plan was simple: create a situation where Levi would be forced to face both women at the same time, where his lies would unravel completely, and where Gaia would finally see him for what he really was. I just needed the perfect opportunity to bring it all together. The opportunity came 2 weeks later when Gaia called to invite me to Sunday dinner. Levi had been on his best behavior since she'd discovered the financial discrepancies, bringing her flowers, cooking her favorite meals, acting like the devoted husband he'd never actually been. "He wants to apologize to you properly," Gaia said over the phone, "for what he said at Christmas dinner." I almost laughed. Levi wanting to apologize was like a snake wanting to give up venom, but this was exactly what I'd been waiting for. "Of course, sweetheart. What time should I be there?" 6 o'clock. "And Dad, thank you for being patient with us." Patient. If only she knew how patient I'd really been. That Sunday, I arrived at their house carrying a bottle of wine and the folder containing all my evidence. Levi greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Clark, good to see you." Come in, come in." He was trying too hard, his voice pitched higher than usual, his movements jerky with nervous energy. He knew something was coming, but he didn't know what. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Gaia had made pot roast my favorite, and Levi kept the conversation light, asking about my work, commenting on the weather. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand trembled slightly when he reached for his water glass. "So," I said when we'd finished eating, "I think it's time we had that honest conversation." Levi's fork clattered against his plate. "What conversation?" I pulled out the folder and set it on the table between us. "The one about your family." "Dad," Gaia started, but I held up a hand. "Not just Marcus and Jennifer," I continued, looking directly at Levi. "The conversation about all of it." Levi's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I don't know what you think you know, but I know that you've been living a double life for 9 years. I know that Jennifer Martinez believes she's in a committed relationship with you. I know that your son Marcus was born 2 months before you married my daughter. And I know that you've been using Gaia's money to support them." The silence that followed was deafening. Gaia stared at her husband, waiting for him to deny it, to explain it away like he had before. Instead, Levi stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this." "Yes, you do," I said calmly, "because it gets worse." I opened the folder and pulled out the bank statements. $63,427. "That's how much you've stolen from my daughter over the past 4 years." Gaia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "63,000? Including the 15,000 from your mother's life insurance policy," I added, watching Levi's face crumble. "Money she saved specifically for your future, money she made me promise would always be yours." "That's not theft," Levi said desperately. "We're married. What's hers is mine." "Actually, it's not." I pulled out another document. "Because you've been committing fraud. Every time you transferred money without Gaia's knowledge, every time you lied about what it was for, you were breaking the law." Levi sank back into his chair, the fight going out of him. But I wasn't finished. "The house where Jennifer lives? The one you told her you bought for your future together? You purchased it with Gaia's inheritance money, Marcus's private school tuition? Gaia's been paying for it without knowing. Even the car Jennifer drives was bought with money stolen from your wife." Gaia was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to me?" "I can explain," Levi started, but his voice cracked. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" I pulled out a stack of photos. "Because it looks like you've been playing house with another woman while my daughter supported you both. I spread the pictures across the table. Levi at Marcus's baseball games. Levi and Jennifer at parent-teacher conferences. Levi helping Marcus with homework in Jennifer's kitchen. Years of documented lies. Years of a secret life my daughter had been unknowingly funding. And this, I said, pulling out the final piece of evidence, is a letter Jennifer wrote to you last month. Gaia took it with shaking hands and began to read. I watched her face change as she absorbed Jennifer's words about their future together, about how excited she was that Levi was finally ready to make their relationship official, about how Marcus had been asking when Daddy was going to move in permanently. She thinks you're leaving me, Gaia whispered. She thinks you're going to marry her. Levi couldn't meet her eyes. I never promised her anything. That's not what this letter says. She's talking about wedding plans, about Marcus being your best man, about starting over together. Gaia's voice was getting stronger, anger replacing hurt. How long were you planning to keep this up? I don't know, Levi admitted. I never meant for it to go this far. Which part? I asked. The stealing, the lying, or the fact that you've been planning to abandon my daughter after bleeding her dry? That's when the doorbell rang. Gaia looked confused. Are we expecting someone? I stood up. Actually, yes. I took the liberty of inviting a few people who I thought should be part of this conversation. I walked to the front door and opened it. Jennifer stood on the porch, holding Marcus's hand. Behind them was my lawyer, carrying a briefcase full of divorce papers and criminal charges. Hello, Jennifer, I said gently. Thank you for coming. She looked nervous, but determined. Is he here? In the dining room. Are you ready for this? She nodded, squeezing Marcus's hand. We need to know the truth. I led them into the dining room, where Levi sat frozen in his chair. Gaia's eyes widened when she saw Jennifer and Marcus. This is Jennifer Martinez, I said to my daughter, and this is Marcus, Levi's son. Marcus looked up at Levi with confused eyes. Daddy, why are you here? I thought you were at work. The simple innocence of that question broke something in the room. Gaia covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jennifer stared at the evidence scattered across the table, at the life she hadn't known existed. You told me she was your ex-wife, Jennifer said to Levi, her voice hollow. You told me the divorce was finalized years ago. That was a lie, I said quietly. They've been married for 8 years. The same 8 years you thought you were building a future with him. Jennifer's legs gave out, and she sank into an empty chair. Marcus moved closer to Levi, sensing the tension, but not understanding it. Someone needs to tell me what's happening, Gaia said, her voice deadly calm. Right now. I looked at Levi, giving him one last chance to tell the truth himself, but he just sat there, mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air. So I told them everything. About the financial theft, about the house and the school tuition, about the promises Levi had made to both women. I explained how he'd been manipulating them both, stealing from one to support the other, lying to everyone. When I finished, Jennifer was crying and Gaia was staring at her husband with an expression I'd never seen before. Not hurt, not anger, but something colder, disgust. Get out, Gaia said quietly. Gaia, please, Levi started. Get out, she screamed, her composure finally breaking. Get out of my house, get out of my life, and don't you ever come back. Levi looked around the room desperately, seeking sympathy or support, and finding none. Even Marcus had stepped away from him, frightened by the shouting. You can't just throw me out. I live here. My lawyer stepped forward with his briefcase. Actually, Mr. Stevens, you don't. This house is in Mrs. Stevens's name, purchased with her inheritance before your marriage. You have no legal claim to it. He handed Levi a thick stack of papers. These are divorce papers, along with a restraining order. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. Levi stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. This is insane. You can't do this. We can and we are, I said. And if you try to contact Gaia, Jennifer, or Marcus after today, you'll be arrested. What about my son? Levi asked desperately, looking at Marcus. Jennifer stood up, her grief hardening into resolve. Your son deserves better than a father who lies and steals. You'll be hearing from my lawyer about custody arrangements. As Levi stumbled upstairs to pack, I put my arm around Gaia's shoulders. She leaned into me, exhausted by the emotional upheaval. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said softly. "No," she replied, her voice stronger than I expected. "I'm grateful you showed me the truth. I just wish I'd seen it sooner." 27 minutes later, Levi left the house with 2 suitcases and the knowledge that he'd lost everything: his wife, his son, his home, and his future. All because he'd gotten greedy and cruel enough to bite the hand that had been feeding him for years. As his car disappeared down the street, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The weeks that followed Levi's departure were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, financial recovery, and emotional healing. But they were also filled with Levi's desperate attempts to salvage what he'd destroyed. The first call came 3 days after he'd left. Gaia's phone rang at 2 in the morning, and I heard it from the guest room where I'd been staying to help her through the transition. "Please, Gaia, just listen to me," Levi's voice carried through the thin walls. "I can explain everything. I love you. I've always loved you." I got up and found Gaia in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of anger. "Love?" she said into the phone. "You think what you did was love? You stole from me for years, Levi. You used my mother's memory to fund your lies." I could hear him on the other end, his voice high and desperate. "I was going to pay it all back. I was going to tell Jennifer the truth and end things with her. You have to believe me." "When?" Gaia asked, her voice deadly calm. "When were you going to tell her? Before or after you convinced me to give you access to my trust fund?" The silence on the other end was telling. Gaia looked at me, and I saw something I'd rarely seen in my daughter's eyes: steel. "Don't call me again, Levi. My lawyer will handle everything from now on." He hung up and immediately blocked his number. But Levi didn't give up easily. When he couldn't reach Gaia directly, he tried other tactics. He called my office, claiming there was a family emergency. He showed up at Gaia's workplace, causing such a scene that security had to escort him out. He even tried to use Marcus as leverage, calling Jennifer and demanding to see his son. That's when Jennifer called me. "He's been harassing me," she said, her voice shaky. "He keeps showing up at my house, saying he's going to fight for custody of Marcus. But Clark, I don't think he really wants custody. I think he's just trying to manipulate me into helping him get Gaia back." I met Jennifer at a coffee shop near her work. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, telling the story of sleepless nights spent worrying about her son's future. "What exactly has he been saying?" I asked. "He claims that if I testify on his behalf, if I tell Gaia that our relationship was just a mistake, he'll continue supporting Marcus and me. But if I don't help him, he'll disappear from Marcus's life completely." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Even now, facing the consequences of his lies, Levi was still trying to manipulate the women he'd hurt. "What did you tell him?" Jennifer straightened her shoulders. "I told him to go to hell. Marcus deserves better than a father who uses him as a bargaining chip." I smiled at her fierce protectiveness. "Good, and you don't need to worry about support. My lawyer has filed claims against all the property Levi purchased with stolen money. You'll get to keep the house, and there will be funds set aside for Marcus's education." "I don't understand. Why would you help me? I was part of the reason your daughter got hurt." "No," I said firmly. "You were a victim just like Gaia was. Levi lied to you, manipulated you, used you. The only person responsible for what happened is him." That afternoon, my lawyer called with an update that made me smile for the first time in weeks. "Levi's tried to withdraw money from 3 different accounts," he said. "All of them have been frozen pending the fraud investigation. He's also been served with papers for the civil suit. And here's the interesting part. He can't find a lawyer to take his case." "Why not?" "Because the evidence is overwhelming, and he has no money to pay legal fees. Word gets around in legal circles about cases like this. No reputable attorney wants to be associated with such clear-cut fraud." That evening, I was helping Gaia sort through financial documents when her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered it anyway. "Hello? Gaia, it's me. Don't hang up." Levi's voice was different now, defeated, desperate. Gaia put the phone on speaker so I could hear. I'm at a hotel downtown. I don't have anywhere else to go. My credit cards are maxed out. My accounts are frozen. I need help. That's not my problem anymore, Gaia said calmly. Please, I'm begging you. Just let me come home. We can work this out. Work what out exactly? The 8 years of lies? The $63,000 you stole? The son you hid from me? Which part did you want to work out? I made mistakes. Mistakes? Gaia's voice rose. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is being late for dinner. What you did was calculated, deliberate betrayal. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, I want you to leave me alone. I want you to stop calling, stop showing up at my work, stop trying to manipulate Jennifer. I want you out of my life permanently. You can't mean that. We have 8 years together. That has to count for something. I watched my daughter's face as she considered his words. For a moment, I thought she might waver. 8 years was a long time, and despite everything, I knew she'd loved him. You're right, she said finally. 8 years does count for something. It counts as 8 years of my life that I'll never get back. 8 years I wasted believing in someone who didn't exist. Gaia, goodbye, Levi. She hung up and immediately added his new number to her blocked list. 2 days later, Jennifer called with news that surprised us all. He's gone, she said. Levi came by yesterday morning and said he was leaving town. He didn't say where he was going, just that he couldn't stay here anymore. What about Marcus? He barely looked at him, just said goodbye like he was going to the grocery store. Marcus doesn't understand why his daddy left, and honestly, I don't know what to tell him. I found myself thinking about that little boy, innocent and confused, another casualty of his father's selfishness. Would you like me to help you find a child psychologist? Someone who specializes in helping kids deal with abandonment? Jennifer's voice was thick with gratitude. Yes, please. And Clark, thank you for everything. I know this wasn't your responsibility, but you've been kinder to Marcus and me than his own father ever was. That afternoon, I drove to the hotel where Levi had been staying. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to see the man who'd hurt my daughter face the consequences of his actions. The desk clerk confirmed he'd checked out that morning, leaving no forwarding address. As I drove home, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Levi was out of our lives, sadness for the destruction he'd left behind, and something else, a deep satisfaction that justice had been served. Gaia was in the kitchen when I got back, making dinner for the first time since the confrontation. She looked lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. He's really gone, I told her. Left town this morning. She nodded, not looking surprised. I know. I felt it somehow, like the air in the house got cleaner. We ate dinner in comfortable silence, both of us processing the end of a chapter that had defined our lives for so long. Dad, Gaia said as we cleaned up, I owe you an apology. For what? For not believing you sooner, for letting him disrespect you in your own home. Well, the home you were paying for. For choosing him over you so many times. I set down the dish I was drying and looked at my daughter. You don't owe me an apology for loving someone. You owe yourself forgiveness for trusting the wrong person. How did you know? She asked. How did you see through him when I couldn't? I thought about it for a moment. Because I wasn't blinded by love, and because I've learned that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. He showed me, didn't he? All those times he was disrespectful to you, all those times he made excuses for not wanting children, all those mysterious trips and late nights. I just didn't want to see it. The heart wants what it wants, I said gently. But now you're free to want something better. As I watched my daughter begin to rebuild her life, I realized that sometimes being a father means being patient enough to let your child make their own mistakes and strong enough to be there when they're ready to face the truth. Levi had lost everything, his wife, his son, his home, his future. But Gaia and I had gained something precious, the truth and the chance to build something real on its foundation. 6 months later, I sat in my favorite chair in Gaia's living room, watching my daughter laugh at something on her laptop. It was a sound I'd almost forgotten, genuine, uninhibited joy. The woman who'd been crushed by betrayal had slowly rebuilt herself into someone stronger than before. The house felt different now, lighter. The oppressive weight of Levi's presence was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of peace and possibility. Gaia had redecorated, choosing colors and furniture that reflected her personality rather than trying to please someone else's taste. "Dad, look at this," she said, turning the laptop toward me. "It's an email from the prosecutor's office." I read over the message, a smile spreading across my face. Levi had been found in Nevada, living under a false name and working construction for cash. He'd been arrested for fraud and was being extradited back to face charges. "How do you feel about it?" I asked. Gaia considered the question carefully. "Relieved, I think. Not because I want him to suffer, but because it means other people won't get hurt the way we did." It turned out that Levi's pattern of deception hadn't started or ended with us. The investigation had uncovered 2 other women in different states who'd been victims of similar schemes. One in Oregon, who'd lost her savings to a man claiming to be a business consultant. Another in Colorado, who'd supported a struggling entrepreneur for 3 years before discovering he was married to someone else. "The prosecutor said they're looking at federal charges now," Gaia continued. "Something about crossing state lines to commit fraud. He could be in prison for years." I nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. Justice wasn't always swift, but sometimes it was thorough. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Gaia went to answer it, and I heard familiar voices in the hallway. "Uncle Clark." Marcus bounded into the living room ahead of Jennifer, who was carrying a plate of homemade cookies. The boy had grown taller in the past few months, and his resemblance to Levi was less noticeable now. Maybe it was because he smiled more, or maybe I'd just learned to see him as his own person rather than a reminder of betrayal. "How's my favorite Little League Stars?" I asked, ruffling his hair. "I hit a home run yesterday," Marcus announced proudly. "Mom said I could tell you about it." Jennifer smiled apologetically. "I hope you don't mind us dropping by. Marcus wanted to show you his trophy." "Of course not, your family." The word came out naturally, surprising me. Somewhere along the way, Jennifer and Marcus had become part of our lives. Not because of Levi, but in spite of him. They'd been victims too, and healing together had created bonds that felt more real than any blood relation I'd had with my former son-in-law. As Marcus regaled us with detailed accounts of his baseball prowess, I watched Jennifer and Gaia preparing tea together in the kitchen. They'd developed an unlikely friendship, 2 women who'd shared the same betrayal finding strength in each other. "Jennifer's been seeing someone," Gaia said quietly when she returned with the tea service. "Oh?" "A teacher at Marcus's school, someone honest and kind, someone who knows the whole story and doesn't judge her for it." I glanced at Jennifer, who was blushing slightly as she helped Marcus arrange his trophies on the coffee table. She deserved happiness after everything she'd been through. "What about you?" I asked Gaia. "Are you ready to date again?" She laughed. "Not yet. I'm still figuring out who I am without someone else defining me. But I'm not afraid of being alone anymore. That's progress, right?" It was more than progress. It was wisdom. Later that evening, after Jennifer and Marcus had gone home, Gaia and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset. The yard looked different too. She'd planted a garden, something she'd always wanted to do, but Levi had discouraged, claiming it would be too much maintenance. "I got a call from the bank today," she said. "They've recovered most of the money. $47,000 from the sale of the house in Riverside, plus some from Levi's accounts before they were frozen. That's good news. I've been thinking about what to do with it. Part of me wants to put it all away, save it like I always did. But I think Mom would have wanted me to do something meaningful with it." I waited, knowing she'd tell me when she was ready. "I want to set up a college fund for Marcus, and maybe donate some to organizations that help women who have been financially abused." I never realized how common it was until this happened to me. Pride swelled in my chest. My daughter had taken the worst experience of her life and found a way to help others with it. "Your mother would be proud of you," I said. "I hope so. I feel like I'm finally becoming the person she raised me to be, instead of the person I thought I needed to be for someone else." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Gaia leaned back in her chair and sighed contentedly. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said. "I'm happier now than I was when I was married, even with all the mess and the legal battles and starting over. I feel like myself again. Who were you when you were married to Levi? She thought about it for a long moment. Someone smaller, someone who apologized for taking up space, who made herself invisible so he could shine, someone who was afraid to have opinions or dreams that might inconvenience him. And who are you now? A smile played at the corners of her mouth. Someone who plants gardens and speaks her mind, and doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. 3 weeks later, I received a letter forwarded from my lawyer's office. It was from Levi, written from county jail while he awaited trial. The return address made me pause. I hadn't expected him to reach out, especially not to me. Inside was a single page, covered in Levi's familiar handwriting. Clark, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I don't blame you. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I finally understand how wrong I was. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to make excuses. I'm writing because I need you to know that you were right about everything. I was using Gaia, I was stealing from her, and I was too much of a coward to face the truth. I also need you to know that she's better off without me. She always was. You raised an incredible woman, and I spent 8 years trying to make her smaller so I could feel bigger. That was unforgivable. Please don't tell her I wrote this. She doesn't need to hear from me ever again. But I wanted you to know that you did the right thing. You protected your daughter when she couldn't protect herself. And that makes you the kind of father I'll never be. Tell Marcus I'm sorry if you think he's old enough to understand. Tell him his mom is the strongest person I know, and that's not because of me. It's in spite of me. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but please take care of them. Take care of all of them. Levi. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Some apologies were too little, too late. But this one felt genuine, and maybe someday, years from now, Gaia might want to know that her ex-husband finally understood the damage he'd done. For now, though, it was enough to know that Levi was facing consequences for his actions, while the women he'd hurt were building new lives, filled with truth and possibility. That Sunday, our weekly family dinner included Jennifer and Marcus for the first time. As I watched Gaia teaching Marcus how to make her grandmother's famous biscuits, while Jennifer told stories about her new boyfriend, I realized something profound. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not the tense, walking on eggshells atmosphere of the Levi years, but something warm and genuine and safe. We'd all been hurt, but we'd chosen to heal together rather than let that pain isolate us. Dad, Gaia said as we were cleaning up, thank you. What? For what this time? For seeing what I couldn't see, for being patient with me, for not saying I told you so when you had every right to. I pulled my daughter into a hug, holding her tight. Being your father is the best job I've ever had, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. As the evening wound down and our makeshift family settled into comfortable conversation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. We'd weathered the storm, faced the truth, and come out stronger on the other side. Levi had tried to destroy us with his lies, but all he'd really done was clear away the illusions so we could see what was real. And what was real, love, loyalty, family built on truth rather than deception, was stronger than anything he'd ever been able to touch. In the end, the man who'd claimed I wasn't welcome in the family had been the one to leave. And the family he'd left behind was better, stronger, and more genuine than anything we'd had when he was part of it. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are. Levi had done that, and in doing so, he'd set us all free.